Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. I'm also a county supervisor over here in Johnson County. We're glad to have you. Iowa News and Views is a community affairs program focusing on state and local issues in and around Iowa. We have a web page. We have what is called an email listserv. It's a way for people to talk with one another about issues around our state. And basically, we're a communications network. This is a program, a public access program, which is one part of our effort. We encourage you to check out our email address, and we're going to give it in a little bit here, as well as visit our web page to learn more about the program. This program is produced at the Public Access Studios in Iowa City by volunteers. We've been doing this since February. This is show 22, and we're really happy to have with us our guest, and that is House Minority Leader David Schrader. He's a Democrat from Monroe. Thanks for being here, David.
Thank you, Joe.
Appreciate it. Later in the program, we're going to be having a segment on the People's Podium with David Osterberg, and we hope you'll stick with us. And we want to say right now, no flipping. David, over the course of the last few years, here in Iowa, we've been trying to deal with a variety of issues. Recently, I saw Governor Branstad on another TV program that plays around the state saying that the state of Iowa is in excellent condition. It's in good condition, and when he gives his State of the State address next year, he's basically going to tell us that. What kind of shape is the state of Iowa under Governor Branstad's leadership?
Well, I think the state of Iowa is in great shape. I don't think that any politician can stand up and take credit for that. Much of the credit is that we are in a time when the national economy is doing very well. People are working. When people are working, they're paying taxes. The state has a good, positive balance in its account. Most of our citizens have jobs. Many of us would like to see those jobs better paying jobs with better benefits for those folks. But all in all, we're doing better than we've done for a long time.
Very good. So what's as a House Minority Leader, you've been doing this for 3 years, you've been in the legislature for 11. What's your role as House Minority Leader in leading the Democratic Party?
Well, my role is to convince Iowans, and I think there's a case to be made that while Iowa is doing very, very good right now, we can do a lot better. Things in Iowa are needing some attention that this governor and this legislature controlled by Republicans just haven't paid attention to. The hog lot issue, there's some very serious concerns about the environment, the way neighbors are treating neighbors. Always in Iowa, we've had a social contract in place where there was a certain way you got along with your neighbors. The new mega facilities owned by corporations out of state aren't paying attention to those social contracts. We're very concerned about education. In Iowa, education has always been the #1 priority of every legislature as long as I can remember, yet we've seen a time over the last few years that reading scores are slipping backwards. Our ACT test scores are no longer the first in the nation. We have a crumbling infrastructure in many of our communities, buildings that aren't safe, roofs leaking, fire code violations, and those concerns aren't being addressed. And it's perplexing to me that in a time when the state is doing so well, that our #1 priority seems to be lagging. We can do better than this, and we can address the needs that we have.
Well, one of the problems of our economy, it seems, has been noted, is that we have a shortage of workers, and we don't have all the skills we need in our workforce. How do House Democrats see addressing that particular issue of having a workforce that can handle the work?
We proposed a program last year called Iowa Wins. This was a scholarship program. The idea of it was to get kids in some form of higher education after high school. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of the kids that graduate from high school in Iowa don't go on to any form of higher education. In the economy that we're in today, that's just not enough. My grandmother's 95 years old. She graduated from 8th grade. In her time, that was appropriate. My parents graduated from high school. That was appropriate in their time. I graduated from high school in 1970. It could go either way then. You could go on to higher education, get a job. You also could finish high school, go get a good job at a plant somewhere. Those jobs have disappeared. Everybody needs some higher education. It might be a community college, it might be courses at a college, it might be a degree, but everybody needs some of that. Our program would have allowed all kids access to a $1,000 scholarship, not just the top of the class, not just the kids with a lot of resources, but every kid in that class would have had access to $1,000 the top 25% would have had access to $2,000 for scholarships for schools in Iowa. I think that getting those kids in higher education will help us build up that workforce where we have folks with the skills that are ready to give those employers the kind of employees they're looking for.
There are a number of issues that come out of that in terms of the education piece, and a number of our viewers have sent questions in about your appearance here, and one relates to the idea of, throw out a couple things, we've built, what, 3 prisons in the last 4 years. Can we continue, where are the resources going to come from to support higher education and K through 12 if we have other priorities that maybe take money away, and also questions about, and I don't know about more tax cuts next year with some of the infrastructure needs, some of the education needs. Where are we going to get the money if we continue to build prisons and look at tax cuts?
Well, first, to look at the bigger picture of all the priorities that we have, Democrats are going to meet this Saturday. We're going to form our agenda. I visited with leaders and others in our party. I can tell you that our agenda is going to be one with education at the top, insurance reform, health care reform, the hog lot issue, juvenile justice. We've got way too much violence in our schools and on our streets from children that can be treated, not necessarily incarcerated, but treated. We need to address those concerns. We feel that before we talk about tax cuts, we need to come in and look at our priorities, fund those priorities. I think there may be some money left for some tax cuts, nothing of the scope that we've seen in the last few years. But we think that the way to make the decision process make sense is to come in and fund those priorities and then see what's left. Not to do as the Republicans are doing and put tax cuts on the table first and then make education and our other top priorities scramble for what's left. That's just backwards of the way we ought to look at this. It was easier when we had a huge surplus. We don't have that luxury now, and we have to budget with a priority decision, a priority-driven decision-making process.
Iowa State did some, I think it was a $25,000 study on infrastructure needs that the legislature approved. That number might be wrong, but multi-billion-dollar of infrastructure needs in the state, from roads to schools to leaking roofs, as you mentioned. We've got some infrastructure needs, and juxtapositioning that or comparing that next to this whole tax cut thing, is it required that we give tax cuts every year now? I mean, do voters expect, do they expect that, you know?
Well, it's always politically popular to come out and tell someone, I'm going to cut your taxes. But what we're seeing now are communities, my kids go to PCM High School. It's Prairie City and Monroe. They combined several years ago. My community passed an instructional support levy. Well, here are folks that on the one hand very much wanted and asked for a tax cut, but on the other hand, when they had an opportunity to direct that money specifically to education, they said, we're willing to do that. So that's why we want to, when we meet in January this year, we want to put education as our top priority on the table first and look at all the needs, not just infrastructure, but class size, violence and behavioral problems in the classroom, all of these issues. Address those issues, make improvements. We need to make improvements. Education, during the best times we've had for decades in this state, we've seen our education position slip, and we just can't let that happen.
Very good. On the issue of hog lots, it's been obviously a big issue over the last couple legislative sessions. We passed House File 519 that some people believe was the solution. Now even the governor's saying we need to get back and look at that.
We didn't pass, the Republicans passed it. Okay.
Thanks for that clarification. What do we need to be doing on hog lots? Are we going to get to local control? Is that something that's out there, or are there other solutions?
Some local control for siting is at the root of this issue. A lot of folks, when you talk about local control, come back and say, but one set of standards in one county and another in another county and another in a third county for a large farmer that might have land on both sides of the county line. They say that just doesn't make sense, and I agree with them. We need strong statewide standards on construction, on different distance setbacks from neighbors, the types of lagoons that are allowed and the types of application that are allowed. I agree with them. But siting is a local concern. What's appropriate in this county is far different from what's appropriate in another county. That's why zoning has always been a local concern. People in Sioux City aren't much concerned about people in Keokuk. So people in those local counties should have some say there. We've got environmental issues, we've got social issues, neighbors get along with neighbors, we've got marketplace issues. All of them are in this big cauldron that is the hog issue. And before we resolve any of them, we've got to allow local people to have a say. And incredibly, that to me is the biggest problem that we have in attempting to resolve this issue now, is that the mega producers in this industry don't want their neighbors to have a say. On the one hand, when the new facility moves into an area, the neighbors don't have a say whether the site is appropriate or not. And then, to make things worse, the legislature took away many of the rights associated with nuisance suits. Right. And those neighbors, if things go bad, even though they had no say up front, on the backside, if things go bad, they again have no say. So people in rural Iowa and in many communities are feeling powerless, and what's sad is they're powerless to determine the destiny of their own communities. Local control is at the root of the problem here. If we have local control, which I advocate, there will be people disappointed with decisions. There always are. But they will have had their say. And they will have went to their local elected officials, stated their case, and they have a chance at the ballot box to change that. That's our system. I just can't understand why resisting that has become one of the hallmarks of the Republican Party during this debate about large hog lots.
That's a good point. You're watching Iowa News and Views. Our guest is House Minority Leader David Schrader. He's a Democrat from Monroe, Iowa, and he's with us. We're talking about hog lots in Iowa and concern about that. Remember, no flipping. We've got another 15 minutes here. We've got some good content coming at you, so hang with us. David, we talk about this as a rural issue. What should urban folks think about this? Most of our viewers of this program live in cities. How is this issue affecting people that live in cities around the state of Iowa?
Well, people that live in cities drink water, and they're concerned about the groundwater, they're concerned about the environment. Most people in cities from Iowa also are only 1 or 2 generations removed from the farm. Those folks that live next door to one of these new facilities probably live in grandpa's farmhouse or their aunt or uncle's home, and they're concerned about them. But the environmental concerns are real. The earthen lagoons that have been built in Iowa, we've had spill after spill, and they haven't been here very long at all. Over the period of time when they become older structures and erosion has taken its toll, we could see more rivers fouled. We were in a time when we were seeing the groundwater in Iowa, or the surface water in Iowa, improve. The Shell Rock River was dead at one time. It's improved. You can catch fish in that river now. Now all of those surface waters are at risk. And even some of our most precious lakes, both man-made and natural lakes, are at risk because there are no controls locally as to the appropriate siting. People are building these facilities in the worst possible places to put these facilities. So urban people ought to be concerned. They're concerned about their relatives and friends that live in the rural areas. They're concerned about those vacation spots that they treasure as Iowans. They're also concerned that they live downstream from these facilities, and their drinking water is at risk.
Sure. We both just attended a conference held by the Iowa Environmental Council on looking ahead, looking back 10 years at the Iowa Groundwater Protection Act passed in 1987, and looking ahead to how have we done over this 10 years, and what needs to happen in the future. How big a role will environmental issues be in this next session and in the agenda of House Democrats?
Sure. Well, we believe, House Democrats believe, that the hog lot issue has to be at the top of any environmental agenda. It's certainly going to be at the top of ours. But we also agree with the Iowa Environmental Council that we need to catalog where we're at. What is the condition of the surface water in Iowa? It's been a long time since we've studied that resource. We need a baseline. There are a lot of things happening in our society that didn't happen 30 years ago. There are products, there are chemicals, there are uses that weren't present then. We need to know how they're affecting both our surface water and our groundwater. And although we took some steps in the Groundwater Protection Act and offered the direction for future legislatures to take larger steps, those steps haven't been taken. In the last few years, there's been an attempt to weaken environmental laws, and not much of an attempt to not rewrite the Groundwater Protection Act, but just within the guidelines move forward. And I think we need to do that.
Continue to implement it.
Absolutely.
Very good. Let's move to a couple other issues. And again, I'd like to thank our viewers for sending in these questions on our email listserv. We encourage you to sign up for that. What will be the caucus's stand against or how will they come up against the death penalty this year if we see some debate on that?
Well, I can't speak for every member of my
Sure.
caucus. We had a great year in the '96 election, so we have 15 members that haven't yet had to sit and make that decision in the legislative session. Most of them have answered to their constituents, and most of them would oppose the death penalty. I've opposed it all of my life. I think that those folks that serve in the legislature that have thought long and hard about this issue have landed on a position that isn't going to change. You know, their thought process and their decision making is based upon their upbringing. I mean, mine comes from growing up in a United Methodist family and learning the values at an early age and holding on to those. So I think that you'll see very few supporters in our caucus for Governor Branstad's proposal.
I see. So one of your jobs as House Minority Leader is candidate recruitment, I
Sure.
assume. How's that going, looking for next year's elections?
It's going real well. I do wear two hats, and on one side I have to do the political work for our caucus. We had great success in 1996. That's helping our candidate recruitment this year. People like to be a part of a winning team. When they run for office, they want to have an expectation that they're likely to win. In 1996, we had, if you don't mind me taking a moment, I like to tell this story. We re-elected all but one of our incumbents to the Iowa House. We had 5 members that retired. We filled every one of those seats. We took 3 of the open seats from Republican retirements and defeated 7 Republican incumbents. That seems to indicate to me that the policies of this Republican legislature really aren't selling all that well across Iowa. It also indicates that these were good people that stepped up to run. So we've had great success because of that success 2 years ago.
How do third-party politics begin to complicate things in Iowa? We have the Reform Party, and in a number of communities we have the Green Party. Is that what message is there for Democrats or for those folks looking at third parties? How do the Democratic Party bring those folks in?
I think we've had real success with third parties. The Democratic Party is, after all, a coalition of people with different interests, and we believe that the coalition ought to have open doors so that people, everyone is free to come in and join us. And I think we've had some considerable success in Iowa because of that. People that are in third parties often have one issue or more than one issue that they're especially concerned about. Sometimes those issues aren't compatible with our philosophy, but usually they are. And so we welcome them to be a part of our coalition.
Very good. We're getting down to that time where we move to the People's Podium. It's a time where we offer an opportunity to a guest commentator to come on and visit with you about a particular topic. Our guest commentator tonight is David Osterberg, former state representative and environmental activist here in our state. And he's going to talk to us about the recent global warming summit that's taken place in Kyoto. And he's going to be with us to visit about that for a few minutes, and then we'll be back to wrap it up with House Minority Leader Schrader.
As Joe said, the Kyoto meetings have begun today in Kyoto, Japan, to try to come together, a number of nations of the world, to see if they can come to an agreement on reducing greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse gases are mainly carbon dioxide, and they work like a greenhouse. If you think about the fact that inside a greenhouse, light comes in and then it's trapped there for a while before it cools down. The same thing happens on the Earth. It's a natural phenomenon. However, because a lot of fossil fuels have been burned since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution a couple of hundred years ago, we have increased the atmospheric amount of CO2 by about 30%. Also, in about the last 150 years, we've seen a gradual increase in the Earth's temperature. Those kind of pieces of data have convinced the majority of the world's scientists that we may have a problem that is going to make the Earth hotter and hotter over the next 100 years or so. So they've come together in Kyoto to try to make some decisions on what should be done. Now, the U.S. position is going to be funny, and I think weak, because for the last 5 or 6 months we've been seeing things on television, full-page ads like the one I'm holding here in the newspaper, that say basically that this is not a fair treaty because the United States has to reduce more quickly than places like Mexico. It also says that for us to reduce CO2 would really hurt our economy. I want to disagree with this, and I want to make 3 points. Number one, we have 4% of the world's population. We use over 20% of the greenhouse gases. You know, if we're not supposed to take the lead, just who in the world is supposed to take the lead on this issue? It is clearly one of those issues that we have an obligation to do something about. Second, on the economy, there's no one-to-one relationship between how much fossil fuel you use and how much your economy grows. This article of Newsweek magazine that talked about global warming shows that between the years 1973, when there was an embargo on oil to the United States, and 1986, about 13 years, the U.S. economy grew by 35%. The amount of energy that we increased was nothing. We did not increase the amount of energy at all during those 13 years. The reason for that is efficiencies, changes in technology. Some of those examples now are, in October there was a major breakthrough in what we're going to see happen with automobiles. We have a new fuel cell powered automobile that seems very novel. It was announced in all the newspapers of the state. But there can be some sort of simple things too, just like more insulation in people's homes. All of those things reduce the amount of energy we need to have and don't cost jobs, and in fact they often have more jobs associated with them. Third point, Iowa can benefit a lot from reducing greenhouse gases, because by using fewer fossil fuels we may be using something else. One of those things may be switchgrass. In October I was in a field near Centerville where a co-op is trying to put together a plan to produce 10,000 acres of switchgrass. Those switchgrass acres will then go to fuel a power plant. The Ottumwa generating plant is being changed this next spring so it will accept 5% switchgrass along with coal. That is a new product for Iowa. And switchgrass, being a tightly grown crop, has a lot less erosion than corn would. It only is planted about every 5 years, uses less nitrogen fertilizer. All of those things are good water quality aspects to switchgrass growing. And it produces energy. It uses CO2. I mean, the whole process, when it's burned, CO2 comes out, but CO2 comes back in as it grows. So it is no net increase. And in fact, wind power, we have a wind farm going in northern Iowa also next year, will use absolutely no CO2. There are ways that we can produce energy and not cost our economy. Global warming has some real problems. We're not positive they're all going to happen, but if they do begin to happen, we have some serious problems. Something ought to take place to do something about it. I think that I'd like to say that we shouldn't be afraid that we're going to wreck our economy by actually doing the right thing, which is to take a very strong position in Kyoto this week.
Thank you very much, David, for that insightful commentary. We appreciate that. If you've got comments, we'll give you some information on how to send us your comments about that. We're visiting with Dave Schrader. Dave, we're getting down to the final minute here. Insurance reform in Iowa, what's on the burner for that this coming year?
Well, that's an issue. Democrats addressed the 24-hour maternity stays, mothers and their newborns being kicked out of the hospital. 2 years ago, we had success and got that passed. We're still hearing again and again from families in Iowa horror stories of inappropriate care. Texas and Missouri have adopted legislation that would allow someone who is denied care from an HMO or a managed care organization or an insurance company, that would allow someone to sue those folks just as you would sue a medical professional who made a bad decision. That's been adopted in those states. I think we ought to adopt it in Iowa. But one of the problems that could also be addressed is Iowa could join the 10 other states in the nation where the people have the right to elect their insurance commissioner. In Iowa, we have an insurance commissioner appointed by the governor. That person has become little more than a spokesman and a booster for the insurance industry. We need a consumer advocate. The issues that are affecting our families, we need someone standing up for us. It seems that that industry is doing fairly well.
That's a terrific idea, and one that probably received a lot of support out there around Iowa. It'd be good to see that pushed.
I think it would. This comes at the same time that the other party is pushing to eliminate the people's vote on the Secretary of Agriculture, which is something the Democrats are going to oppose. Given the opportunity to vote, whether to give people a chance to vote and participate, or whether to make another position, another appointed bureaucratic position, we think that, and our philosophy tells us, that we ought to give people the chance to participate and make that decision.
Very good. David, I want to thank you for being our guest today on Iowa News and Views. You've been watching Iowa News and Views, a public affairs program produced in Iowa City and sent around the state of Iowa. I'd like to thank you for not flipping. I'd like to tell you that we've got a couple very important and exciting upcoming shows. Our next time we're going to have Dale Todd, who's the newly elected Parks Commissioner from the city of Cedar Rapids and the first African American to be elected to the city council there. We've got another show coming up on utility deregulation and a show also on living wage efforts and a campaign going on in Des Moines on that topic. We thank you for joining us. Remember, this is just a TV program. You can do something about global warming each and every day in your community. We encourage you to get out there and do it. Join us next time. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. Thanks.